Morning, you guys. I'm going to try to talk louder because we've got a bunch of sounds going on around us this time of the morning. It is 9:05 when I'm doing this. Sorry for the delay, but yeah, we're 8 hours ahead, and so I was so tired when we got in last night because we've done nothing but walk since we've been here, and this was actually a work trip for my husband. He had to work in Lisbon, Portugal, doing a temple dedication, and we decided we'd actually stay another week and do Rome because he knew how much I wanted to come here. And so, yeah, it's been exciting and exhausting, but still fun because we've still got days ahead of us and we've got to go catch some more sights. And so, really excited about that. But anyway, sorry for the delay, but I'm going to try to talk louder. But anyway, we're going to start our reading of the Gladiator's Day of Grace, and this is a Christian's short story of this gladiator Maximus. Okay. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight. Exodus 33:13. Blood on my hands, red soaks the sand, the bleeding is staunched, and the sword is buried, but the stain remains. MVM. 1:33 AD. Standing on the shores of Galilee in Capernaum, Maximus Vitruvius Messala inhaled deeply. The clean, sweet tang of the sea filled his nostrils as sparkling waves lapped against the sand, washing treasures of sand dollars and colorful shells ashore. Closing his eyes and folding his arms over his massive chest, he slowly exhaled. To anyone observing him, he probably looked out of place standing on Jewish land, wearing a white Roman tunic trimmed in woven gold or burgundy cloak, and finely made leather sandals laced up his muscular calves. He probably should have tried to blend in more. Then again, he wondered why it even mattered. Roman, Jew, or Ephesian, they all bled the same. We all bleed the same. Opening his eyes another moment, Maximus stared out over the almost transparent water. With feet planted apart and his sandals pressed firmly in the sand, he pondered grimly how unpredictable life was. Raised in a home of prominence and wealth, Maximus had never given much thought to that commonly uttered phrase, though he had certainly heard it used enough by the older generation. Life is unpredictable, my young friend. You can never be certain of anything. Having every luxury known to man within reach of his fingertips had kept him occupied enough as a young man, and his mind never had cause to travel along those lines in any manner of seriousness. After all, what purpose would it have served? Life was whatever you made it. This was his father's adage, and his father, Lucius Vitruvius Messala, had always been a wise man who had taught his only son much, molding him into his own image. Maximus had worshipped his father. His love for his mother, he loved his mother as well for her kind and tender ways, but his respect for his father had run deep. If he had only understood then the unpredictability of life and of people. Following in the illustrious footsteps of many of his male kindred, Maximus became a soldier of Rome at 17, after years of fighting under the banner of Caesar, proving himself instrumental in many battles. He was celebrated as a decorated centurion, with 100 men or more under his command at any given time. He then earned his place as a senior staffer in his legion, commanding cohorts of men and garnering the respect of every soldier he fought beside. His ambition would have swiftly moved him up in position, elevating him to great military heights. He'd even had the rank of general in his sights. But somewhere along the way, The empire propaganda began to wear thin, and Maximus began to think for himself. Even as he served Rome, he sensed that things were not as they seemed. The cause Rome fought for was not a just one. It never was. Conquering other people and cultures wasn't a real cause, it was just greed. And at 27, Maximus had finally had his fill of fighting for a gluttonous empire forever consumed the lands, territories, and treasures of its so-called enemies, an empire whose appetite would never be sated. Needing to vent his frustrations or go mad, Maximus shared his views with his father one evening in the bibliotheca. It had been the biggest mistake of his life. Incensed at his son's political views, Lucius threw down the book he'd been reading, knocking over a small pile of novels on the desk that he hadn't yet put away. He accused Maximus of treason and said he would not allow him to throw away his military career for the sake of ideals, not to mention the shame it would bring upon the family should it be known that Lucius's own son was speaking out against Roman rule. The men were unaware that a traitorous household slave had been standing just outside the bibliotheca door, listening to every word spoken between them. The servant, Absalon, had harbored a grudge against Maximus for years. Eliana, a household slave Absalon loved, only had eyes for Maximus, and she refused Absalon's overtures, no matter how honorable his intentions were at the time. Unlike the young masters of numerous other villas and estates, Maximus made no advances toward the female slaves and servants of their home, and he only kept company with women of his station, daughters of other nobles. When Absalon's overtures turned less than honorable, the slave girl began to avoid him, keeping close to other servants and never allowing him to catch her alone, which only fueled his anger towards Maximus. Within an hour of the heated conversation with his father, there were armed soldiers standing at the door waiting to charge Maximus and take him away. His denial of the charges fell on deaf ears, and Lucius uttered not a word in his son's defense. He said nothing that night, nor did he during the pointless trial that took place the following day. Rome was always swift when it came to doling out what it considered justice. Fortunately, Claudia, Maximus's mother, had been away visiting a sister and wasn't there to witness the complete betrayal of her son. It was an act that crushed Maximus and killed his trust in his father forever. Maximus was found guilty and sentenced as a political prisoner. Anguished and heartbroken, and already of weak constitution, his beloved mother died a month later. The anger that raged through Maximus upon her loss was an inferno that burned hotter by the day and threatened to consume him. He was soon offered a way to put out that fire, fight as a gladiator for 3 years and earn his freedom and a discharge from the military. Romans thrived on blood, money, and entertainment. Having Maximus in the arena would assure that all 3 desires were met. And while most political prisoners were stripped of everything and left with the hopeless contemplation of suicide, he had been given an option, though many would consider the arena a form of suicide. However, Maximus found it a generous offer indeed. War had hardened him, both mentally and physically, and whether he fought out on the battlefield or in the arena, it was the same and made no difference to him. If he had been a common nobleman, life in a ludus might have broken Maximus, but he had been anything but common, and the lanista, the gladiator trainer, knew this. Maximus's military record spoke for itself. Training had been brutal, but nothing he couldn't handle. He had done enough parrying, hacking, thrusting, and blocking with a sword and a shield in battle to hold his own. He'd also trained with a framia, a long, sharp spear used by Germanic tribes, and he was grateful to acquire that skill because he would come to use it often in gladiator battles. Maximus was strong, agile, and lightning fast. Out on campaigns, he had been practically unstoppable. That experience would serve him well in the arena. He and the other gladiators were well cared for. They had been put on high-energy diets of barley, boiled beans, oatmeal, ash, and dried fruit, a far cry from the rich foods he had been used to, but it was sustaining and did its job. Some of Maximus's competitors had put up a good fight, but most did not stand a chance. Sometimes he'd even had to draw the match out to make it look good. If there was one thing the crowds hated, it was an instant kill. They were entertained when they could watch a predator play with its food for a measurement of time before devouring it. By the end of 3 years, Maximus had 50 kills to his credit, as well as a missing middle finger on his right hand, a permanent scar running through his left brow, and his freedom, with a stipulation that he leave Rome and settle elsewhere. He had already decided to return to his childhood villa in Ephesus. His father may have been Roman, but he'd taken an Ephesian wife and had lived in Ephesus for many years. Fortunately, they still had holdings there. On the day he was released, Maximus received some news. A document had been sent to the proconsul, a social acquaintance of Maximus's father, from Lucius Messala himself, clearing his son of all charges of treason. It was signed shortly before Lucius's death from typhoid fever the day before. A second document was delivered to Maximus at the Ludus. He broke the seal and unrolled the scroll. It was his inheritance. His father had left him everything, the villa, the business, the entire estate. Below his father's signature, written in shaky hand, were the words, Maximus, Absalom has been sold and can cause no more trouble. My son, I am sorry. Forgive me. I will never forgive him, he vowed. That was 2 years ago. Much had changed since then. The early spring air was balmy and cool, and Maximus adjusted his cloak as he continued to lose himself in the memories. Grimacing slightly and placing a hand against his chest, a vision of his final kill in the arena again filled his mind. He remembered with clarity the look in the battle-hardened man's eyes as the warrior knelt before him. Life was slowly draining from a gaping mortal wound in his side from Maximus's gladius. Jugular, jugular, the frenzied crowd had roared, urging Maximus to dispose of his opponent with a quick, well-placed slice, effectively ending his life as a gladiator. The man had been a Christian and a slave, guilty of nothing save worshiping a god that made the Romans uneasy, a god that they did not believe in but felt threatened by nonetheless. Maximus had been trained to believe that the Christian religion was based on rebellion, with its believers amassing an army to overthrow Roman rule. He had often wondered if there was any real truth to that belief. So far, all the Christians he'd met were the opposite of rebels, like the one kneeling beneath his blade. Even now, Maximus could still feel the blood on his hands and could see it streaking the leather tunic he'd worn. Some of the blood had been his own, but not much, at least not this time. Finish it, the fallen warrior had growled softly, tilting his head back and exposing his neck. Looking up into Maximus's eyes, he'd repeated with a deep rasp. Finish it. Give me peace. Almost envying the peaceful resignation in the gladiator's piercing gaze, Maximus nodded and granted him his release from this life, while mentally vowing that he was done with killing forever. He would not shed another drop of blood. Maximus had wondered if his hands would, or even could, ever be clean again. Drawing his mind away from the gory memories, Maximus sighed as his thoughts finally shifted and touched on events that had transpired since walking away from the arena. Though the fire inside him had cooled along with the bloodlust and his soul had quieted as well, questions were now stirring in his mind, bringing with them a fast-growing restlessness. There were not so many there were so many things that he did not understand, things he had seen, heard, and experienced, and things he wanted to know, that he needed to know about the man. Maximus needed to know the truth about the gentle leader who had healed the servant of his friend Alexius, a fellow centurion. He still remembered his friend's words when the rabbi offered to come to his home and heal the servant. Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. The man had responded by declaring the greatness of Alexius's faith. He had said because the centurion believed his servant would be healed, and he was healed. Maximus had seen it with his own eyes when he'd accompanied Alexius back to his home. Sadly, this man who had healed the servant was soon betrayed by one of his own circle. He was scourged by Roman soldiers, mocked and spat upon by his own people, and crucified between two thieves. It happened just over 3 months ago. He had been worshipped and revered by a precious number of believers, and still was even after his death. They called him the Messiah. Maximus had heard that, according to the prophecy written in the scriptures of the Jews, this Messiah, Jesus was his name, rose from the dead 3 days after his death, and he still lived. Maximus found it hard to believe. He had only heard Jesus teach once, and the freedom and peace of the soul that this rabbi offered seemed like an elusive dream, one that someone like him could never acquire. Still, he needed answers, and only one person could give him those answers. He continued to gaze out over the water, taking in the sounds of the sea and watching the fishing boats out in the distance, waiting for her. It seemed he was always waiting for her. His waiting had begun 2 years ago, the moment he saw her graceful form enter the peristyle, carrying a basket of fruit from the market. So, that's chapter 1 there. I will try to make sure I have another chapter uploaded either tonight or tomorrow. Can't tell you what time it'll be because I'm still mixed up with the time change, us being 8 hours ahead. But I hope you enjoyed that chapter. Chapter 2, of course, and the rest of the chapters are going to be a lot shorter. My intro chapters are always longer. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that intro chapter of the Gladiator's Day of Grace. And so I'll get this uploaded as soon as I can, and I will have the next chapter ready soon. But anyway, enjoy.